Welcome back for another episode of Errant Adventures. As always, I'm your game master and solo player, Steve Morrison. This week, we're doing something a little bit different. I thought it would be fun and quite possibly self-indulgent for me to do a campaign wrap-up for Season 1. I don't know if this is the sort of thing that will be of interest to folks, or if it's the sort of thing that I will do for Season 2 and on, but I thought it would be a good opportunity to answer a few questions that I've gotten and also read out some reviews that I've gotten because I think it's important to do so. And I haven't done that in the main show, and so I wanted to make sure that I gave some air to that right now. So welcome. And once again, I expressed some of this in the season finale for Season 1, but I want to say again, thank you to everyone who has listened, who has followed and liked and commented. It has been an incredible journey for me and something that I never really expected. And it's just been a complete and utter delight to create these stories and share them with you. And so I just want to thank everyone who has listened very much from the bottom of my heart. So let's jump right in. I want to start off by talking a little bit about how I started Errant Adventures. And then I'm going to move into some reviews, answer some questions, and kind of bounce back and forth from there. So I started Errant Adventures kind of as an accident. Last year, I was playing around with doing some Starforged playtesting, and I was having a hard time journaling and writing down my adventures. Because I write fiction in my free time, I was struggling a little bit with feeling like, well, why don't I just go write a novel rather than playing this game? And I, at the same time, was dealing with this desire to start podcasting and recording, to the point that my local gaming group and I bought audio equipment in February of 2020, which was great timing. And all of that audio equipment ended up at my house for the next year or so, where we were unable to get together in person to record and play. So I started playing around with the audio equipment. And during that time, I was struggling with the Starforged playtest and wanting to participate in the community, but not feeling as though I could really do the sort of journaling RPG, writing down my game session and do so in a way that was satisfactory to me, that wouldn't also take away from my time and enjoyment of just writing fiction. So I put these two things together, and I decided that I would record myself playing a few sessions of Starforged, post it up on the playtest Discord, and see if that was in any way interesting or useful to Shawn Tomkin, the designer, or anybody else who was participating in the playtest. So I went ahead and recorded the world building and truth selection bit, and I posted that. And then I think the day I posted that, the sector creation rules came out. And so I quickly did those as well and posted those up. And then I recorded an episode or two of myself playing and posted those. And I received very, very positive responses, and people who I didn't know were saying very nice things about my storytelling and my audio quality and all these things. And I sort of realized I don't have to wait for my gaming group to be ready to record a podcast. I can just start doing it myself right now. And over the next 3 to 4 weeks, I came up with the name Errant Adventures. I did a little bit of graphic design for the logo, and I launched the podcast at the end of 2020. So that's how I came to start Errant Adventures, and I have no regrets whatsoever in starting it, other than, and it's a very minor regret, I started it with the 3 episodes that I had recorded for the Starforged playtest and nothing else in the bank. So I have basically been trying to catch up ever since then and get ahead to a point where I wasn't recording and publishing an episode each week the week before it had to go live. And I did get a little bit ahead before the end of season 1, but I'm kind of back to that point now for season 2 because I was struggling a little bit with getting started on season 2. But that's a story for maybe the season 2 wrap up if I decide to do something like that. So I sort of started the podcast on a whim based on some very nice comments from people that I didn't know, and I'm very glad that I did. So let's move on to some reviews, and I'm just going to read through these real quick. The first one comes from Gianna WQ, and this was on Podchaser, and the review goes as thus. This is brilliant. It makes me so excited to play Starforged, but even without my excitement for the game, it's still wonderful storytelling. It's so amazing to see a story being constructed like this. Thank you for something that brightens my week. Well, thank you, because that is an incredibly generous and kind review. And I'm going to try not to cry during the course of this recording, because I really have been struck by how many kind things that people have said about my storytelling. And I don't consider myself to be special or a genius storyteller or anything like that. I'm just a person who loves stories and has been telling stories since I was a little kid. And I'm just incredibly thrilled and happy to be able to share those with other people. So thank you. So the second review comes from Gorgonhead, and this is also on Podchaser. And this is a very entertaining gameplay of a very interesting RPG, Ironsworn Starforged. I really like the storytelling and role-playing in this podcast. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. Again, it's an honor to hear people, responding to this storytelling. And you're probably going to get sick of me saying this over and over and over again, but thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening and enjoying. So this is a question that I got on Twitter from at Josh Meehan Art. Joshua is the lead artist for Starforged and is been a very inspiring to me with all the art that has shown up online that I've gotten to look at and just enjoy, and it fuels my imaginations. And so Joshua asked this question. I would love to hear about your starting expectations and how those expectations changed over the game. So I talked a little bit about starting the podcast, and it really did start with Starforged. I didn't intend to do a podcast when I started the whole Starforged playtest, but very quickly I decided I wanted to do a podcast using Starforged, but also I know myself and I know that I love different forms, different genres. And so the idea of just doing a Starforged podcast isn't what I initially intended. So I had this vision of I'll do the first season and then I'll switch to something else in the second season. And so my expectations going into it really revolved around doing Starforged, basically telling a story until I felt that I had reached a conclusion that was satisfying to me, and then moving on to something else. And as often happens with creative endeavors, for me anyways, I wasn't sure how long it was going to be. When I started, I was like, maybe this will be 10, 12 episodes, and then I'll do something else. And then as I got into it, I was like, okay, maybe this is going to be 100 episodes. I don't know. So it was sort of surprising to me how long it took and how little time it took, because boy, that time flew by quickly. So my starting expectations were a little conflicted. Of course, being a human being, I had, on the one hand, the desire to release a bunch of stuff and then suddenly be hailed as the greatest role-playing game mind out there almost instantaneously. And I knew that wasn't going to happen because I'm not crazy. But I think there was a little bit of managing some of those expectations, especially when starting to release the podcast and being kind of obsessive about download numbers and things that aren't necessarily good indicators of success or not. And so I started off very focused on like, oh, how many downloads am I getting? How quickly are people talking about this stuff? And then I realized that I was going to get discouraged very, very quickly if I kept that as the metric by which I measured my success, because I knew I wasn't going to be an overnight success. I knew I wasn't going to blow up and become the next big podcast, but I think expected to see more downloads early on than I did. And so there was a little bit of like overcoming that discouragement and realigning my goals. And one of those things, I think it was a Brandon Sanderson video that he did on YouTube, Brandon Sanderson, the author, where he basically talked about, why are you writing? Are you writing because you want to make money, or are you writing because it's the thing you need to do? Because your goal is going to determine how much effort and the kind of effort that you put into a creative endeavor and how you measure your success. And so his big thing was, if you are writing because you want to become famous, you're probably going to fail. But if you're writing because you have to tell these stories, then no matter how many people read them, and by extension of the podcast, no matter how many people listen to them, if you are telling the story because it is the thing that is important to you, then you have not failed. And so I very quickly had to make my adjustments mentally on those, on my expectations of what was going to happen. As far as expectations of the game, I played a little bit of Ironsworn before. There are some, shall we say, lost episodes of an early Ironsworn game that I did record using a terrible mic that I will never share with the world because the audio is so horrific I can't even stand it myself. And that was very helpful to me, and also sort of encouraged me to try doing the recording when I got around to Starforged. And so I had enough experience with Ironsworn and Starforged going into the podcast that I was pretty excited about it. Had been wanting a sci-fi version of Ironsworn for a while, because I started to do an sort of hacked version of Ironsworn for a sci-fi setting that I have written stories in, which I have recordings of that too. Once again, that will probably never see the light of day because the audio is so bad, but they exist. I have them on my hard drive, and every once in a while I'll go back and listen to them. And the story for that sci-fi world may come back again in the future with Starforged. So I had high expectations for Starforged as a game and as an experience, and my expectations were exceeded at every step. And I'm now a couple episodes recorded into season 2, and I think part of it is just getting into a new system, a new setting, new story. But I am already missing how easy it was to tell stories in Starforged. I feel like I'm doing more heavy lifting now with season 2 than I did with season 1. And I think it'll even out as I grow comfortable and as I get into the story and sort of find my way, if you will. But I love how easy and straightforward it is to tell stories with Starforged. And it's phenomenal. I absolutely love it. I think it is fair to say that it is number 1 on my list of games that I love. So I hope that answers your question, Joshua. I'm going to move on to the next question, which kind of is a multi-part question that both Matt Risby of the Bad Spot podcast on YouTube, which if you haven't watched that or listened to that, I highly recommend it. I was happy to see that Matt started his podcast as I was coming to the conclusion of mine, because now I will have some Starforged content to enjoy while I am off doing other systems and other stories. So he was one of the people that asked this question. Also at OffrayLC on Twitter also asked a general question that covers a lot of these things. So this question is about the behind the scenes recording. What hardware do I have? Process of recording, rituals and places for recording. So we'll start with hardware. So I started off with a podcast set that my gaming group bought. It was a pretty inexpensive package deal from Rockville Audio, which I think is just an off-brand sort of audio company, and just a condenser microphone. There were 4 condenser microphones plus a audio mixer in that pack. And I still have the mixer. I still use the mixer and everything else. I did recently buy a new microphone, which is what I'm using right now. And that's the Rode Pod mic, which so far I'm enjoying quite a bit. Although I think there are some differences that I'm still working out, but I think generally speaking, the audio quality is better through the Rode Pod mic, and I'm very much enjoying using that. It is a dynamic mic, so it is a little bit different than the one that I have. I'm still hopeful that our local gaming group is going to do some recording together, in which case I will go back to using the mic that matches all the other mics just to keep a measure of synchronicity in sound quality on those. But for now, while I'm doing solo stuff, it's going to be with the Rode Pod mic. I have an iMac that I record into. I just record into GarageBand. And then I have used Audacity for audio editing for a while. And so I export the audio file from GarageBand into Audacity, and then I do all of my editing from there. I do a little bit of like audio engineering on the file coming out of GarageBand, but most of that work is done in Audacity. I use GarageBand also for music. The theme song that I wrote for Starforged, I wrote that myself and recorded it. And I started off with the delusion that I could be like Griffin McElroy of the Adventure Zone and record music for the podcast. And I tried for a little while, and that's why in the first few episodes, there are some musical pieces that come in and out. But I eventually realized that I don't have nearly as much musical skill as I need to in order to do that quickly. And B, I just unfortunately don't have the time to clink away at it and figure it out. So that's why I started using Sirenscape for music and audio. And then I still write the intros and outros, the themes, if you will, for the seasons myself. But all the other music, I just use either Sirenscape, or I've also used some tabletop audio for the end of season 1. And that was a real sort of exciting thing for me, is when that music came out right about the point at which I was ending season 1, and I was just listening to some of those pieces, and I was like, man, these are gorgeous, and I just need to incorporate at least one of these into that final episode. And so that last sequence with Lucius and Adelie is just, it's one of my favorites that I recorded. And that's largely in part to the music that is playing along with it. So that's my general sort of hardware. As far as my process for recording, it varies a little bit, but for the most part, I record on Tuesdays, and those are usually my day off from my day job, and I usually spend about half an hour writing the narrative intro for the episode. And then I would spend about an hour to 2 hours recording the episode. And once I'm done recording, I export that file into Audacity, save it, and then either I go ahead right into editing, and that usually takes me for an hour long episode. I should be clear too. I record for an hour, but sometimes it takes me an hour and a half or 2 hours to record an hour of audio because I have to stop and, look up music for Sirenscape, or I have to stop and think about an Oracle answer and decide what I want to do. I mean, sometimes it's as simple as, the cat knocks over something while I'm trying to record and I have to stop and get up and go, take care of that situation and then come back to it. So I record an hour's worth of audio, but oftentimes that looks more like an hour and a half to 2 hours of recording time for me personally. So once I've got the recording done and I've got it exported into Audacity, it usually takes me for an hour, again, of audio, 2 to 3 hours of editing time to get it where I want it. If it's a really rough edit, it'll be about 4 hours. But at the bare minimum, it's about a 2-to-1 ratio of time to edit. And more often than not, it's about 3 hours. Once I have it all edited, I then write my intro, and that's where I pick my episode name. And that's the intro is the little part that goes in between the intro music, where I welcome you to the episode and give you a brief preview of the episode and give you the episode name. That I usually write after I've edited. And then I record that real quick, splice it all in together with the intro and outro music, and then export it. And then I usually, within the next day or two, listen back through the episode all the way before I post it to my pod host. And if we're talking about equipment and other stuff like that, I use Buzzsprout as my podcast host, and it's been pretty great so far. So no complaints there. As far as rituals or places, well, I'll start with places because that's easy. My original recording studio was in our downstairs spare bedroom, which I converted into a recording studio middle of 2020 when I got that audio equipment. I set everything up in there. I was playing around with it in there, and then I started recording. And then about a month or two ago, we were going to have a couple house guests, and so we needed that spare bedroom. So I took all the recording equipment upstairs into my partner's studio, which she was very gracious to let me use. And I set up my computer and microphone in there, and that is where I'm recording this right now. As far as rituals go, I don't think I have any specific rituals when it comes to recording, other than I usually have a bottle of water with me. I sometimes will make myself some tea if it's not too hot out, just to help with the throat and with hydration. And I feel like probably my biggest ritual is the psych up moment before I start recording. Because even though I'm just recording into a microphone alone in a room, I get nervous. Every time I go to start, I get nervous. So I have to psych myself up a little bit, take some deep breaths, tell myself that I can do this. And then I hit record and start reading the little narrative intro piece that I've written. And that usually helps me to settle into it. And then I'm off to the races from there. And usually I will drink an adult beverage after I'm done recording, maybe while I'm done editing, as a reward to myself. So that is basically it when it comes to hardware, process of recording, rituals, and places, I believe. So thank you to Matt and Afre for those questions. let's move on to some more reviews. This one comes from Burl Chaser. It says, this single-person role-playing game has been a wonderful space journey. Thank you very much, Burl Chaser. I just so happen to know that that is my father-in-law, and so I want to say a special thank you to him for listening and having listened to me talk about creative endeavors for a long time now, and now being supportive of me engaging in this particular creative endeavor. So thank you. Then I've got next Moke987, hope I didn't butcher that, from Canada. Says, I'm a big fan of shows like Me, Myself, and Die, so Errant Adventures is right up my alley. I love the endless creativity, high quality audio, and no dead time. Each episode is jam-packed with adventure. Thank you. I am also a huge fan of Me, Myself, and Die. It was one of the big influences to me realizing that something like this medium was possible, this solo roleplay podcast. And I will always strive to be as amazing a storyteller as Trevor Duvall, and I will never be as good of a voice actor because I'm not a voice actor. And even though I try sometimes, I've definitely put on some accents, and I always laugh at myself when I'm going back through and editing them. But it is part of the fun, right? I do the same thing when I'm just game mastering for my friends. And you know what? As long as you suspend your belief and don't try to think of that terrible Irish accent that I'm doing, but really just think of that it's an accent of whatever planet that Emmerich Ryder is from, then it's probably okay. The next one comes from Daniel. This was also a Podchaser review, and this one is actually in Portuguese. So I ran it through good old Google Translate. So I apologize, Daniel, if this does not come through exactly as you meant it, but I think I've got the general gist of what you were saying based on the Google Translate. So I will paraphrase this one, which is he got me with Starforged and continued to impress me with his incredible performance. So I hope the translate came through as delightfully as it was intended, and I thank you very much for that, Daniel. Got a few more questions here. Again, Matt Risby and at Offray LC asked some similar questions about influences, and basically what are my sci-fi influences that influenced my approach to this season of Errant Adventures. I am a huge sci-fi fan. I have been for a long time. I mean, I started off with Star Wars, although I would make the argument that Star Wars is fantasy because it is long, long time ago, and sci-fi happens in the future and fantasy happens in the past. But I think there are a lot of people who would disagree with me on that, and I'm okay with that. So Star Wars has been a huge impact on me. I love Cowboy Bebop, and just that whole aesthetic is one of my favorite pieces of media. Firefly and The Expanse. I mean, I loved Dune when I was in college and just recently read it again about a year ago and still love it. And then Killjoys, the sci-fi show, is one of my favorite pieces of science fiction storytelling and has had a huge influence on me as a storyteller and as a creative. I would say most interestingly to me is that Killjoys, I think, was the show that made me love the properly selected piece of music to go with a scene more than anything else that I've watched. They seemed to have an incredible ability to pick the exact right piece of music that would accompany a scene, and it would just pound home the emotion of that scene. And I still, with my partner, we still listen to music that we discovered through Killjoys that has been a delight and continues to be a delight to us for has been for many years. So I also, I don't know if this was a direct influence, but I just recently read The Last Watch by J.S. Dews, which is a relatively new novel basically these exiled soldiers who are guarding the edge of the universe as it starts to decay. And that was just a really fun read. Again, I don't know if it had any specific impact on me as far as storytelling in season 1, but I really enjoyed reading the book, and I'm sure there are some pieces of it that I nabbed in order to slot into my story. And then kind of an addendum to that from at Offray LC. They say, for example, I find your AI characters appealing, and I wonder about all the craft that put them in your podcast. I appreciate that, Offray. I really do. I had a lot of fun coming up with the AIs. I think one of the things that really struck me when I was going through the setting truths is the idea of the ascendancy. And I am a history major. I studied ancient cultures and ancient civilizations at university. And one of my favorite things in storytelling and in fiction is the conceit of the ancient civilization that has left behind some, remnants of itself that we modern society can explore and engage with. And so I really liked the idea of blending that with the idea of the artificial intelligence truth that I got in the setting truths setup of the season 1. So I really, really enjoyed taking this aspect of like these ancient beings had these artificial intelligences that basically ran and operated their systems, their worlds. And I think I broke them down into a couple of different categories. And so there were like the overseer AIs, there were the like defensive, offensive, like warrior AIs, and then there were the scientific AIs. And so we got to see all of those over the course of the season, with Oracle and Victor both being overseers. We had Warden being one of the sort of warrior defender AIs, and of course Query being the scientific inquiry AI. And so it was just a way for me to bring some of that ancient sort of personality and what I was thinking that civilization was like into the story to connect. And I didn't in any way plan at the start of the story to end up with there being real living ascendants at the end of the story. That was not something that I had originally planned. That grew organically throughout the course of the story, and I was just as surprised as anyone else. Also very delighted. So I appreciate that. But the only other thing I can note about the AIs is that I did go and buy a small crystal, like quartz orb that I keep on my desk as a memento to season 1, because I loved those AIs so much. And I describe them so often as being in these black pillars with this quartz orb floating over them that I just had to go and get myself a quartz orb that I could keep with me as a reminder of Oracle, of Warden, of Query, and just the absolute joy that I had playing those characters and telling those stories in season 1. As we go into the last couple reviews here, this one comes from Joe Gastineau of the United Kingdom. Steve is such a gifted storyteller, and the Ironsworn system is a great framework for narrative-led RPG adventures. This is a really great show. Well, thank you, Joe. I appreciate it, and I agree with you, at least on that second half, that the Ironsworn system is a great framework for narrative-led RPG adventures. It really is, and I am excited to get back to Ironsworn and Starforged at some point in the future. The next review comes from Adeptus Justice of Canada and says, a great demonstration of the Starforged game system potential. Entertaining stories, interesting characters, plots, and adventures. Steve is an excellent storyteller, a good improviser, and his pace allowed me to picture the scenes as they unfolded from his imagination. Highly recommended for those interested in the Starforged system, or if simply looking to put the day's routine on pause. Kudos. Well, thank you very much, Adeptus Justice. I really appreciate it. I am so glad that I was able to do even a small amount of justice to the Starforged system, because boy howdy, is it amazing. I know I keep talking about how wonderful it is and how great it is and how much I love it. And I have no connection to Shawn Tomkin, the designer, other than being part of the playtest and interacting with him on social media. I don't get any sort of kickbacks or anything for talking about Starforged. I wouldn't want any kickbacks for talking about Starforged because it's so good. It is my favorite system. I know I've said it already, but I'm going to say it again. It's my favorite system, and I look forward to coming back to it. And I hope this doesn't sound like I'm putting myself down or putting down season 2 and the system that I'm using for that. But man, Starforged is so smooth and so good at helping you tell a story and generating the story as you go that it's just amazing. So once again, thank you to everyone for the reviews. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all of you who have listened, and it really makes me tear up a little bit thinking about all of these people who have said very nice things about me. So we will end with one final question from Matt Risby of, again, the Bad Spot podcast on YouTube. Go listen to it if you haven't already, and find out what adventures and misadventures his character Archer Barlow gets up to. So the question is, what happened to the giant metal snake? Well, Matt, that's a good question, because I apparently just completely forgot about that dang giant metal snake. It was there, and then it wasn't there, and I'm a little ashamed that I completely forgot and lost that thread. So I'm going to say, as canonically as this can be, that I think that snake made its way onto the Reclaimer and was still there all through the end of the adventure, and is still aboard the World Seeder while Adelie and Lucius are off having their adventures, trying to help the Ascendants return. And maybe someday in the future, there will be another story, whether it's in writing or on the podcast, and we'll tell the story of Adelie and her giant Ascendant metal snake familiar, and whatever adventures they get up to in whatever sector of the Forge that the World Seeder goes to. I guess we'll just have to find out then. Once again, I want to say thank you to everyone for the questions, for the reviews, for just the general support of liking my Twitter account, for downloading the podcast, and for listening and enjoying and just being there. I really appreciate every single one of you, and I cannot believe that I am sitting here recording this season 1 wrap up and getting into season 2. So I hope that I've answered your questions adequately. And if there are any other outstanding questions or thoughts that you have, you can find me on Twitter at errantsolopod, or you can email me at errantsolopod@gmail.com, and I will give you the best answer that I possibly can. Once again, thank you so much, folks, for listening, and I'll see you next time.